Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, dear students. Welcome back to our sessions for the business ethics. The subject today is about the environment, ethics and the environment. And this is one of the most important topics as we talk about ethical issues. We said before that we have different outcomes to cover an edge for each subject, for each session. And today's topic, the kind of outcome that we have to deal with is actually serving the main objectives of the subject, the whole subject. So students at the end of this subject should be able to explain the meaning of depletion of resources and pollution. They should also be able to discuss different environmental issues and hazards. Students should also be able to discuss the ethics of pollution control. Now, this is among the decisions that companies have to deal with. And of course, these kind of decisions are not easy because they have to tackle these issues from an economic point of view and from an ethical point of view as well. We also need to evaluate the ethics and ethical background and remedies for such kind of decisions. Students should also be able to discuss the ethical issues of future generation. That is also another decision that companies have to look at, while in fact this decision is not actually easy to take because we have to balance out between the interests of the company itself, the interests of the stakeholders around, and also we have to look ahead for future generations' rights. So in that, regarding these objectives, we have the following contents. We will first talk about the pollution and resource depletion. We will talk about some of the environmental problems that actually are quite controversial in today's business. We need to talk about the ethics of pollution control. We will also talk about a very important term that is quite famous in today's business, referred to as the ecology or deep ecology. And finally, we will end up with kind of remedies, especially talking about future generations. Now, why we need to talk about ethics and the environment here? We know that modern industry has provided us with the material prosperity and unequaled in our history. This kind of development that we see in today's business was not actually experienced in the past. However, there can be some consequences and drawbacks in terms of the environmental issues. So, environmental issues raise large and complicated ethical and technological questions for our business society, which is not actually easy to deal with. So we start with the first issue here, pollution and resource depletion. Pollution is referred to the undesirable and, of course, unintended contamination of the environment by the manufacturer or by the use of these commodities. So here we said unintended because it could be the result of the use of these products. While on the other hand, resource depletion, the consumption of finite or scarce resources, polluted water and land. When we talk about polluted water, there is actually water, but because it is polluted, it is no longer used, and that is leading to the depletion of that resource. And we have lands, but the land is polluted and that we can't use it no more, leading to the resource depletion of land. We also have another problem which is referred to as air pollution. What is air pollution? It negatively affects agricultural yields, human health, and global temperatures. The effects here, large economic impact and the staggering effect on the quality of human life. We may notice that these problems have been discussed a lot by countries like India, for example. Global warming is another common topic. A lot has been said about global warming, so it is defined as the following. For example here, it can be the result of such kind of gases like the carbon dioxide, methane, chlorofluorocarbons, these gases that absorb and hold heat from the sun, preventing it from escaping back into space. turning the whole globe into a greenhouse. So these gases won't help in escaping or letting these gases escape to the space. What could be the effects of such kind of phenomenon? Massive flooding, as we can notice in today's or nowadays, increases of diseases, loss of plant and animal species, the expansion of deserts at the expense of agricultural land. So these deserts, which we can find even in countries like we never thought before that we'll have or will see deserts. So these deserts, for example, can be the result of such kind of phenomenon. Now, what could be the remedies? The remedy here to deal with this problem is to reduce the emission by 60% to 70%. But this is not actually an easy task. Doing so means a lot of businesses and economic, for example, economies of scales will be affected. A lot of that would damage the economies of countries around the world. So it's not easy actually to think about these things, considering problems like deserts and, for example, diseases and flooding. So talking about this problem requires actually the cooperation of all countries together to face this problem. Another problem we have in mind here is the ozone depletion. Ozone depletion here caused by the release of chlorofluorocarbons into the atmosphere. Now, this kind of gas is actually or currently prohibited by many countries. The effect: new cases of skin cancer each year, and it also destroys many valuable food crops. What could be the remedies? CFC or chlorofluorocarbon production has been nearly stopped all around the world, reducing this damage of ozone layers. And now even companies that produces or may produce this gas will be fined millions of dollars. Water pollution. Water pollution is likewise a serious problem. About 40% of the world's surface water is too polluted to fish or to swim in. Now, pollution comes from agriculture, mines, oil wells, human waste, manufacturing, detergents, and the food industry, among other resources or sources. So, if you're thinking about solutions as to deal with this problem, we need to tackle all these issues, which makes this problem one of the most complex problem referring to when it comes to pollution. So today, almost 1 billion people lack access to safe water, and the world's per capita supplies of water is actually shrinking by time. Another problem affiliating with the pollution is called land pollution. So land pollution can be the result of toxic substances that can be dumped into the land. The effect here: permanent illness that can be found among villagers or citizens, seriously adverse health or environmental effects. Now depletion. Depletion is always linked to pollution. The world loses about 1% of its rainforest each year, which is a very fatal percentage. Now, though fossil fuels consumption has been rising, but we're coming close to the depletion point of fossil fuels. So that is why there is a lot of talk today about having other alternatives, like, for example, the solar system or the green sources of energy. Minerals are also being depleted, becoming more scarce and more expensive as well. So this scarcity will have a serious impact on the world economy. Prices will be very high. So this kind of condition will impact the life of millions and millions of people. Now the effects of pollution control. So far we've been discussing different types of pollution problems and matters and potential effects. Now back to the ethical principles and dealing with these kind of problems. Our duty to protect the environment extends beyond the welfare of humans to other non-human parts of the system. So it's not enough just to think about ourselves as the only living species on Earth. And because of this point of view comes here a new term referred to as deep ecology. So deep ecology is defined as or refers to environment deserves to be preserved for its own sake, not just for us. Now, because the various parts of the ecological system are interrelated, the activities of one of its parts will inevitably affect the other parts. So here, for example, if we're talking about trees being cut by time, this will affect other species like animals, insects, which in turn may affect the life or the way people may farm and may live. Ecological ethics. An ecological ethic claims that the welfare of at least some non-human is intrinsically valuable and deserving of respect and protection. So, in that sense, we have the utilitarian and right arguments both support such view. Under either system, for instance, it would be wrong to raise animals for food in painful conditions, considering the right of these kind of animals and the just way of doing it. There's another kind of solution which is referred to as the absolute ban. So here, true traditional view of ethics can also help us to develop the environmental ethics. For example, utilitarianism, which is based on the greatest benefit to the greatest number of people, and accordingly maintaining the environment in order to achieve that kind of goal. Human rights, which is also one of the individual kind of rights, or the right here is actually addressing individuals, unlike utility or utilitarianism. For example here, William Blackstone believed that the possession of a livable environment is something to which every human being has a right. So for example, individuals in countries like Yemen have the right to live in a livable environment. Now, the problem with the absolute ban of such kind of manufacturing industries is this. The cost of removing certain amounts of pollution can be higher in comparison to the benefit that will be attained, which means that if we think about banning the reason of such kind of pollution, for example, factories, manufacturing industries, plants, this will cause a lot, and that may damage economies of different countries. So this is the cost of such kind of solution. If you compare this kind of solution to the benefits that we gain, then it would be way less than expected, and then the goals we would like to reach. Now, positive right is something that we may think about referring, or as we refer to pollution. Here, a livable environment is not merely something we would like to have. It is something that others have a duty to allow us to have. And that is why we're talking about positive rights. So we have the right to a livable environment. That is a right that should be part of our legal system. It is a right that you cannot attain on yourself. Someone else should help you with, which is here government or a legal system. So a livable environment is essential to the fulfillment of our human capacities. So the moral and legal rights should override people's legal right to property. If this kind of principle is enforced by whatsoever legal system, then we can say that the positive right is attained. On the other hand, we have the utilitarianism. Utilitarians believe that pollution should be avoided because it harms a society's welfare. Now here, we're not talking about individuals, rather we're talking about the whole society. So in that regards, we have two different costs. The first one is the private cost. The private cost is the actual cost a firm incurs to produce a commodity. So these are kind of direct costs. While the social cost is the cost of pollution and the medical care that results from the manufacture of these commodities. What could be the effect? We have price no longer accurately reflects all of the costs of commodity, only considering the private cost, and resources are not being allocated efficiently, and accordingly the society's welfare consequently declines. So here, this can be the result of such kind of problems, not only the actual cost that the customer will bear, but also other costs referred to as social cost. Now, what could be the remedies here? Among the remedies we have in hand is to internalize external cost. So the cost of pollution will be part of the final cost of the product. By this, if one of the customers somehow is affected negatively, of course, by these products, the company will have to offer some kind of help in terms of, for example, insurances or medical support or whatsoever, according to that theory. A firm may be required to pay all those harmed by the pollution simply by acquiring such kind of new costs within the final price. However, there's some kind of difficulties to deal with this solution. For example, not always clear just who's being harmed and by whom. So for example, one of the customers might be affected by one of the problems, but it is not clear by what type of product he or she was actually affected. So the alternatives here: installing pollution control devices like filtration system and stopping the harm at its sources. So this can be an economic good solution, or a solution that is good economically, instead of impeding the or internalizing the external costs within the final price. Conservation in that point. The conservation refers to the saving or rationing of natural resources for later use. In fact, even pollution control can be seen as a form of conservation, since pollution consumes air and water. But here, conservation refers to the saving of finite, depletable resources that we need during our life and future generation also needs. The only source of such resources is what has been left over from previous generations. So this is actually what we have in hand. And that is why we need to think of other generations, for what they will get is actually what we will leave to them. That is why comes here future generations. A number of writers have claimed that it is a mistake to think about or to think that future generations have rights. And they advance three main reasons to show that. Most of those talk is actually by business entities. They believe that future generations cannot intelligently be said to have rights. So, if we're talking about future generations that who do not so far exist, so we don't have actually to think about the rights. Besides, if future generations did have rights, we might be led to the absurd conclusion that we must sacrifice our entire civilization for those or for their sake, while actually they're not among us so far. Finally, we can say that someone has a certain right only if we know that he or she has a certain interest that the rights protects. So we are virtually ignorant of their own interests because they so far do not exist among us. And accordingly here, there's no need to think about such kind of interest as long as they never come up to the moment. So what wants will they have is a question that we cannot answer. And accordingly, we shouldn't be thinking about such kind of interest and future generation. So this is the kind of course, justification as. And now, dear students, we come to the end of our session today, where we have discussed different issues and terms. So the first issue, we talked about the word depletion, resource depletion, and the meaning of pollution. We explained some of today's environmental issues and hazards. We also talked about issues and ethical pollution control. We evaluated the term deep ecology and ecological ethics and some of the remedies that some nations and companies try to come up with. We also talk about the ethical issue for future generation. There's an assignment regarding this topic, which is very important. Students have to tackle these questions. According to the nature of the question, students may have different point of view and different reasoning and justification. By this, we come to the end. Thank you very much for listening. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.